At 67, I thought betrayal couldn't shock me anymore, until my own son and daughter-in-law tried to rob me blind. Over dinner, they plotted to take my $3 million restaurants and my Brooklyn home using poison and lies. The pain of losing Margaret was nothing compared to hearing my child scheme against me, but they never expected how I would turn the tables. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat in my living room with the old brass lamp throwing a warm puddle of light across the coffee table, the kind of light that softens edges and makes a man honest with himself. The apartment was quiet in that familiar Brooklyn way, a faint hum from the radiator, a distant siren slipping past the block, the floorboard by the hallway creaking the same way it has for 30 years. I stared at a stack of envelopes I never throw away, tuition statements, and old bank slips, and let the past walk back in. I paid $60,000 so my son Daniel could finish college when his scholarship didn't cover the last 2 years. I wrote those checks with a mix of pride and fear, knowing what that money meant to our family budget, telling myself it was worth it because a father invests in his child. When he turned 22, I bought him a used Honda for $25,000, newer than anything I ever drove, and I told him to treat it better than he treated himself. The wedding? That was nearly $40,000 all told, once the venue fees and the band and the flowers came due. I told the photographer to take extra pictures of Margaret because she loved dancing more than anyone I knew, and those photos carried me through the first winter after she passed. All of that spending, those sacrifices, felt like bricks in the same foundation. You build, you steady the beams, you paint the walls, and you hope the house holds. I never imagined the same hands I steadied, the hands I held steady at his first bicycle ride, would reach back later and try to empty the safe while looking me in the eye. Why does a child who has been given so much and forgiven more choose betrayal when gratitude would do? The things at stake are not numbers on paper. They breathe. They carry the smell of onions and butter, the sound of a door opening at 6 in the morning. My company started with a single diner on a corner where the bus line rounds too fast, and now it's 7 locations spread across the city, worth more than $2.5 million by the last valuation Robert, my attorney, walked me through. Those dining rooms hold birthdays and proposals and quiet breakfasts after bad news. They are the work of my back and Margaret's hands, the way she folded menus to save on printing costs, the way she remembered a regular's coffee order better than the regular did. And then there is this house, our Brooklyn place, the modest brick row with the front steps we scrubbed every spring and the window box Margaret insisted on even when the heat made her dizzy. Zillow tells me it's worth about $700,000 now, but no algorithm can price the oak table I built in the garage with borrowed tools and a stubborn streak. That table holds the notches I carved to measure Daniel's height. If you run your fingers along the edge, you can still feel where he pressed a fork too hard the night he told us he'd gotten into college. On the mantel, the wedding photo of Margaret in a simple dress smiles into the room like sunlight. Her frame stays dusted because I make sure it stays dusted. The company, the house, the table, the photo. These are not trophies or trophies' cousins. They are rooms inside me. To hear anyone speak about them like chips at a card table, take this, sell that, transfer here, turns my stomach and stiffens my spine. The dinner invitation that sounded like a bridge back to family now echoes like a door closing hard. After years of silence, Daniel called me with a voice that trembled as if he were still a boy who broke something and didn't know how to confess it. He told me he missed me. He said Claire missed me too. He mentioned pot roast because he remembers what Margaret cooked on Sundays. I wanted to believe him. I put on my good jacket, the one Margaret liked because it made me stand straight, and I brought a bottle of whiskey I've been saving for a day worth marking. When I walked into their place in Montclair, everything gleamed and smelled like a magazine, and I felt small in a way I haven't felt since I stood at the front of the church without my wife. The smiles were too smooth, the questions too sharp. They asked about succession, about signatures, about what would happen if I got sick, about options for the house. I told myself it was curiosity. I told myself this was just a family trying to talk like adults. But there was that feeling under my ribs, the one that whispers when a storm is offshore. Hearing their low voices later, whispers meant to be safe, made my ears burn. The words weren't made for a father to hear. I walked out with my heart beating like a drum too tight. Back here, in the quiet, the aftertaste of that night sits heavy. I can't pretend I misheard. I can't pretend it was a misunderstanding. Betrayal doesn't need a spotlight. It glows on its own. "Margaret," I said to the empty chair beside me, the one that used to hold her knitting, "what would you say if you knew our boy was plotting this?" I answered myself with the only truthful line left. She would say to stand up. She would tell me to protect what we built. Hurt is an animal with many lives. It shows up first as shock, then as a slow sting that finds every tender place and taps it. I felt insult bloom into anger as I looked at the framed receipts on my wall, the first dollar we earned at the diner, the first license renewal, Margaret's handwriting on an old recipe card for meatloaf that still brings people in on Wednesdays. I heard the click of the heating pipes and counted the dollars I've poured into this family, not to keep score, but to keep faith with the truth. $50 here for gas when he was broke. 300 were there when the rent came due early. Larger numbers when he forgot that loans are not gifts and gifts are not to be expected. I told myself again to breathe, that the numbers are less important than the promise. And then I heard another voice, my own this time, correcting me. No, the numbers matter because they are the shape of the promise. The impulse to blame myself wandered in, tried to rest on my shoulder, and I pushed it off. This is not about being a perfect father. This is about a grown man making choices, and those choices being cruel. It felt like someone had taken a picture from my mantel and hung it upside down. It felt like touching the oak table and finding it sticky with something you can't wipe off. I tapped my fingertips on the arm of the chair and let the anger settle into something more useful. I remembered the way Claire said Margaret's name at dinner, as if she owned it, as if the dead can be drafted into schemes they never would have blessed. I felt the disrespect burn like a match. I told the room the sentence I needed to say out loud. This is not only about money. This is about trust, about love, about lines you do not cross. If they cross them once, they will try again. And if they try again, I must be standing in a different place, on firmer ground, with my hands full of the tools I need. The room around me became a catalog of the life I've lived and the proof that I am not imagining things. The sofa sags on one side because Margaret favored that spot when her knees hurt. The rug is one we bargained down at a flea market in Queens, the year Daniel was 10, and insisted on carrying it to the car, laughing as the fringe trailed across the sidewalk. The end table holds a nick from Thanksgiving when the carving knife slipped. I can still smell lemon oil from the last time I polished the mantel, and I can still see the faint pencil mark behind the lamp where Margaret measured my height the day I insisted I had shrunk from grief. The floors in the hallway are the ones I put in myself, planks I measured twice and cut once with a rented saw that screamed like a city bus. My hands remember that work. They remember every screw and splinter. Touching the wall, I feel the paint I rolled on during a summer when the heat made us open all the windows and play Sinatra too loud. These details are not quaint. They are anchors. They keep me from being washed away by the lie that family excuses everything. They do not. I said it again to the still air, to the empty chair, to the part of me that still hopes without evidence. Family does not mean surrender. A father's heart is large, but it is not a vault you can loot because you share his last name. If I have to spell it out for a judge someday, if I have to explain it to a banker tomorrow morning, I will say it plainly. This home is not a bargaining chip. Those restaurants are not a ladder out of someone else's hole. And I, even at 67, am not a signature to be harvested over pot roast and flattery. By late afternoon, the light through the window turned the dust into snow, slow and quiet, floating in the beam like a memory you can almost name. I watched it for a while and let the stillness do its work. Then I leaned forward and opened the drawer where I keep the things that matter when a storm comes. The keys to the safe were on their hook, right where they always are. I walked to the hall closet, moved the winter coats, and swung the small safe door wide. Papers have a smell, a kind of dry whisper. The life insurance policy sat on top in a thick envelope, Margaret's maiden name printed in neat type, a number that made sense when we were young and has grown into a safety net that comforts me. Under that, the corporation documents Robert filed when we converted the business, share certificates crisp as new bills, board minutes, tax filings, vendor contracts with signatures I know by heart. In the back, our old will, outdated since Margaret died, with provisions that no longer fit the life I am living. I set it aside and felt a tug in my chest, not grief exactly, but the ache that comes when you look at a map you used to follow and realize the road has shifted. There were other things in the safe, too. The deed to this house, the title of the van we use for deliveries, a worn envelope of photographs Margaret insisted I keep away from sunlight. I took what needed taking and laid it out on the dining table I built, one sheet after another, and I listened to the way the paper settled. I remembered Robert's calm voice, the way he tells me not to rush, the way he reminds me that preparation is not paranoia. I imagined calling him first thing in the morning. I imagined asking him to review the will, to draft a new power of attorney that does not include Daniel, to advise me on freezing any account that looks vulnerable, to place notes on the business so no transfer occurs without my written consent, witnessed by someone who cares if I live or die. The anger I felt earlier straightened into resolve. If they mean to take, I said, low, as if Margaret needed me to speak up, they are about to learn how hard I can hold. I left the papers out where I could see them. I turned off the brass lamp, then turned it back on. The room looked different in that small act, like a stage before the curtain lifts. Before I went to bed, I walked the room the way I do on nights when I can't sleep. I touched the photo of Margaret and told her the truth. I told her I almost believed the dinner was a hand reaching back, and I told her I know better now. I told her I would not let the companies we built become chips on someone else's table. I said her name again because saying it steadies me. The house answered with its small answers, a tick in the baseboard, a soft pop from the radiator, the city breathing beyond the glass. I folded the old will into a manila folder, marked it with a sticky note that said, "Call Robert," and slid it beside the insurance policy and the corporate binder. Then I put one more sticky note on my calendar, a simple line that a tired man could read at dawn without confusion. Bank at 9, lawyer at 10. Lock everything. If there is a point where pain becomes purpose, I felt that line under my feet. I washed a single coffee mug, the one Margaret used to favor, and set it to dry. It looked small on the rack, but it also looked like a flag. I don't know what Daniel and Claire tell themselves to make their choices bearable, and I don't need to know. I know what I will tell myself tomorrow when the bank clerk asks for my ID, when Robert opens his file, when I sign the papers that keep the house in my name and the business under my control. I will tell myself that trust is not a blank check, that love is not weakness, that age is not permission to be pushed around. And with that, the night finally let me go. I woke before dawn to the steady hiss of the radiator and the quiet breath of this old Brooklyn apartment. The brass lamp on the end table threw a warm circle of light, the same circle that kept Margaret company on nights when sleep would not come, and I told myself that today I would stop remembering and start moving. I set coffee on the stove, folded the dish towel over the sink so my hands had something to do besides tremble, and dialed Robert. His voice never rushes. I gave him the facts the way a short-order cook slides plates across a counter. My son and his wife pressed me about ownership. They used tidy phrases like succession plan and efficient transition, and I will not sign anything I do not fully understand. He paused long enough to let my pride sit down, then said, "Edward, meet me at 10. Before that, go to the bank and shut every easy door." I put my mug in the sink, shrugged into my navy jacket, and stepped onto the cold sidewalk with a list in my pocket. The branch on Court Street still opens at 9 on the dot. The manager, Evelyn, has eaten more bowls of our Thursday chowder than anyone outside my staff. She took one look at my face and ushered me into her office with the blinds half drawn. I told her I needed hard brakes and bright warning lights. She nodded and typed until the keyboard sounded like rain. We placed a high-risk flag on all outgoing wires. We required in-person approval with two-factor verification for any transfer above $5,000. We suspended external transfers on the operating account until further notice. We added positive pay for checks and turned on ACH filters so only approved vendors could debit. I asked for new passwords, a new PIN, new challenge questions, and a private note on my profile that said, "No exceptions," even if the caller knows my birthday and my mother's maiden name. I wanted one more lock. The operating account carried $300,000 in cash for payroll and supplies, and that number kept tapping my chest like a finger. We moved a large portion into a 90-day certificate so it couldn't sprint out the door. Evelyn set alerts so that even small transfers would trip alarms. Before I left, she made copies of my ID and shook my hand with both of hers. "We'll be careful, Mr. Miller," she said. I thanked her the way a man thanks a bridge that holds. Outside, the air bit clean. I walked the few blocks to Robert's building and let the cold keep me sharp. His reception smelled like lemon cleaner and paper. Robert met me at the door and shook my hand as if he had already decided to carry some of the weight. We sat at the conference table that had seen every kind of heartbreak, and he let me tell the story one clean time. Then he laid out a plan. First, a fresh power of attorney that names no family member. He recommended a professional fiduciary for emergencies. Second, a corporate resolution requiring my written consent for any sale, pledge, or transfer of shares. No proxies, no implied consent, no advisory signatures counted as approval. Third, vendor letters. No new contracts honored without my countersignature in blue ink. Fourth, a standing instruction to our banks. If anyone presents a document without Robert in the room, you call me before you breathe. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment one below to let me know you're here with me. He drafted while I watched. His fingers typed faster than my thoughts, which calmed me somehow. He built a narrow hallway of lawful steps so that anyone trying to run would have to trip. When he finished, he slid the pages over with a pen and a glass of water. I read every line. The language was clean and firm. I signed and dated, where he marked with little flags. He notarized in that steady way of his, stamping, initialing, stacking, until the table looked like a small brick yard of protection. Then he asked the quiet question. "Do you want to adjust your will today, at least enough to reflect the world we actually live in?" I stared at the framed degree on his wall and thought about Margaret's notes on the back of our old will, the ones she made during chemo when she planned a future she knew she might not enter. I nodded. We removed Daniel from any power over my health and property. We added a clause requiring 2 doctors to declare incapacity. We directed that any conflict of interest, family or otherwise, bars participation in decisions about my estate. Between signatures, my phone lit with Daniel's name. I let it ring once so I could decide who I wanted to be, then I answered. He sounded soft with concern. He said he was sorry if last night felt like a lot. He said Claire was making pot roast, just like Mom used to. He said he hated that money ever came between us. Then he pivoted to that polished word again. Succession. He knew a consultant who could model taxes, streamline governance, and avoid probate. He said it would be easier on me. I told him I appreciated the thought and looked forward to dinner. I kept my voice warm enough to pass, cool enough to hold shape. When I hung up, Robert only raised an eyebrow. He doesn't ask questions I don't want to answer. He just said, "Let's add one more layer." He drafted a short letter to any banker or notary who might meet me later. It stated that I had reported potential coercion and that any document purporting to transfer property or authority should be treated as suspect unless Robert was present. He printed me 3 copies and told me to keep one in my wallet. Then he handed me certified copies of the stock certificates and a corporate minute reflecting today's resolutions. Paper with weight matters to men like me. It felt like I was holding the bones of a house that has stood through storms. I left with a neat folder and a steadier heart. On the sidewalk, I let the city noise wash over me. Delivery trucks huffed at the curb. A kid dragged a cello case toward the subway. A woman laughed into her phone. Life goes on, even when yours tilts. I stopped by our first diner. I wanted to be seen there because I wanted the cooks to wave. They did. I ate a bowl of soup standing at the counter like I used to and answered questions about the weather and the meat supplier like any other Tuesday. The ordinariness held me up like a hand under my ribs. Mid-afternoon brought a text from Daniel. "Can't wait to see you tonight, Dad. Claire is excited." I answered, "Looking forward." Then I called the house phone so I could hear the old answering machine Margaret loved. Her voice is gone from that tape now, but the beep is the same. "I'm ready," I told the empty room. I won't be bullied. I won't be tricked. So saying it made it truer. I shaved because looking sharp helps a man feel sharp. I put on the navy suit Margaret bought for Daniel's graduation, the one that still holds the shape of that proud day. I tucked Robert's letter into my wallet and slipped the certified stock copies into my inside pocket. Then I ordered a car and let the ride carry me across the river toward the promised reconciliation, toward a neighborhood where lawns look ironed and driveways shine. Their house in Montclair announces itself before the doorbell, stone and glass, a sweep of steps that turns the walk into a performance. Claire opened the door as if she had been waiting just out of sight and greeted me with warmth you could mistake for love if you hadn't heard last night's questions. She took the bottle of whiskey I brought and praised the label as if praise could polish intent. Daniel followed, handsome and practiced, and for a second I saw the boy who pressed his face to the bakery glass on Saturday mornings, eyes bright, fingers sticky. It flickered and was gone. The foyer smelled like lilies and lemon. The dining room glowed beneath a chandelier that looked like a frozen waterfall. A housekeeper I recognized from last time slipped through with quiet hands, and I made sure to look her in the eye and thank her when she took my coat. We sat in the living room for a spell. Claire perched on the edge of an armchair and asked about the Midtown location with such pointed interest that I had to smile at the precision. Daniel asked about payroll, turnover, and lease renewals. Their questions wore sweaters but carried knives. Dinner came to the table like a show, plates warmed, napkins folded like little tents. The pot roast smelled exactly like Sunday used to smell, and for a moment it carried me to a kitchen where Margaret hummed and told me to get out of her way. Claire served me the first slice with careful hands, then rested her palm on the back of my chair and softened her voice. "Your wife always wanted you to slow down, Edward. She wanted you to enjoy life more. She would want you to let Daniel carry the heavy lifting now." That was the first added twist of the night, not loud, but sharp. She used Margaret's name like a tool. The air thinned. I felt the insult in the small bones of my hands. Margaret never used our son as a crowbar. Margaret never handed me out of our life like a receipt. I kept my eyes on the mashed potatoes and said nothing because I wasn't going to hand them the argument they wanted. Inside, though, a line drew itself darker. The damage of those words wasn't about business. It was about theft. It was about stealing the good name of a good woman to sell a bad plan. I breathed and let the anger find a chair. Daniel poured whiskey into 3 crystal tumblers, generous for me, modest for himself, and Claire. He raised his glass to family and new beginnings. I lifted mine to decency and truth. He laughed because he thought I was being poetic. I took a small sip and set the glass on the far side of my plate where I could watch it. Then the folder appeared, a slim leather thing that would look harmless to anyone who hasn't lived through harm. Daniel set it near me as if it were a gift and said a friend had sketched some ideas. He called what lay inside drafts just thoughts, nothing binding. He said we could talk through any piece I didn't like. He said this wasn't about money, it was about legacy. I opened to the first page. The title read, Transfer of Ownership, and the paragraph below it wound through phrases built to sound safe. Advisory authority, temporary delegation, facilitate continuity. Each line carried a quiet trap. One sentence allowed an irrevocable step upon incapacity without defining how incapacity would be decided. Another gave someone else access to vendor contracts for convenience. I could feel the net even while the threads looked soft. I thanked him for bringing it. I told him I read slower at night and that I would take it home to study, and I smiled with the kind of smile a man wears when he knows where the exits are. He suggested I initial one page to show good faith. My faith doesn't need ink to stand, I said. The housekeeper arrived with green beans and saved us from the moment. Claire told a story about a charity gala as if to throw confetti over the table. My mind kept its own counsel and counted my safeguards one by one. The accounts were fenced, the banks had alerts, the vendors would look for my blue ink. Even if I were foolish enough to sign, the web would snarl. Through dessert, I let them steer the conversation toward light things. I asked about the neighborhood. I remarked on the art. I pretended to admire a painting that looked expensive and empty. Now and then, Daniel slid the folder an inch closer. Now and then, I slid it back with my fingertips, as if we were both not doing what we were doing. It felt like chess with my father at the kitchen table, long, quiet moves that make sense only 10 turns later. I excused myself to wash my hands and stared at the man in the mirror, 67, standing straight. I heard what she said, I whispered to Margaret. I won't let that lie live in our house, even if this isn't our house. When I returned, the folder had crept closer to my plate again. I set it aside without comment and reached for water. We talked another 20 minutes about nothing that mattered and everything that mattered. Daniel asked if I had thought about retiring to Florida, which made me smile because he has never seen me sit still for more than 10 minutes. Claire asked if I had considered the tax savings of certain trusts. I'll consider anything that lets me sleep at night, I said, and she nodded as if she understood. There is power in not filling every silence with your own fear. At last I told them I should be getting back. It was a clean ending, and they knew it. Daniel stood, that easy smile pinned to his face. He hugged me longer than comfort requires. Claire walked me to the door with a softness that would have fooled a stranger. She said Margaret would be proud to see us at the same table again. I looked at her without blinking and said, Margaret would be proud when people choose honesty. She let go of my hand. The second added twist waited in the hallway like a draft. Daniel mentioned, so casually it almost vanished, that his consultant had prepared a one-page advisory consent I could sign next time, just to help with some paperwork timing. I nodded, pocketed the hint, and kept walking. In the car home, I felt the day settle like a coat you choose to keep. I wasn't giddy or crushed. I was anchored. Back at my oak table, I took the folder from my jacket and placed it beside Robert's documents. I wrote a note for the morning. Call Robert at 8, scan and send every page. Ask him for a formal notice. Any future discussions about ownership happen only with counsel present. I set my phone down and tapped the screen off like closing a book. Then I walked through the apartment the way I do when I want to remind myself who I am. I touched the frame of Margaret's photo on the mantel. I ran my hand along the table edge where Daniel once pressed a fork too hard. I looked at the floorboards I laid with my own 2 hands. The calm that comes after action is different from the quiet that comes from giving up. They think I'll sign tonight, I told the room that knows me. They think age is the same as surrender. They're wrong. I slipped Robert's letter back into my wallet, made sure the stock copies lay flat inside my jacket, and for the first time in a long time, I trusted my step toward what tomorrow would bring. The text on my phone arrived between courses, bright as a flare in a dark bay. Stand up and leave. Don't say a word. For a heartbeat, I thought the message was a spam scare, some wrong number tossed into the night. But the screen glowed at my place on the linen like a miniature stage, and the sentence did not blink or fade. It sat there with its own backbone. A man who has cooked for a living trusts timing. I folded my napkin, pushed back my chair, and told my son I needed a little air. I complimented the pot roast like any grateful father would, thanked my daughter-in-law for the wine, and walked toward the hall as if I were only a man with an old back looking for the bathroom. The chandelier sang a faint electrical hum above me. The marble reflected my face with a shine I did not recognize. This house in Montclair carries its wealth like cologne. Even the silence feels purchased. I passed the powder room and kept going toward the kitchen because that is where answers live in any home. The butler's pantry was a tunnel of light between the dining room and stainless steel heaven. I meant to keep walking, but voices caught and held me. Claire's came first, careful and thin, the way people whisper when they are afraid of the sound their own plan makes. "Are you sure you gave enough?" Daniel answered, with the patient confidence he uses when he is convinced of a bad idea. "Enough. 2 glasses will soften him. He just needs to sign." The words landed like ice water down my collar. In that instant, the 1,000 small doubts I had stacked like saucers became a tower that finally made a shape. Whatever I wanted to believe, the truth was pacing the other room. I stepped backward into the shadows on instinct, the way you do when a car slides on black ice and you feel the back end swing. Rosa, the housekeeper, stood with her hands in the sink, washing crystal that hardly needed washing. She did not turn her head, but I saw her shoulders tighten as if she had heard the same lines for days. I moved past her toward the back door. The latch clicked like a coin set on a counter. Night air rinsed my face. The lawn looked manicured enough to iron. Beyond the hedges, the street held its own quiet, not the hush of money, but the plain quiet of winter. My phone buzzed again, a local number I did not know. I answered. A careful voice said, "Do not go back. He wants your signature on the transfer papers. Something in your whiskey will make you agreeable." My mouth went dry. Who is this? The pause felt brave, not theatrical. Someone who will not watch a good man be robbed by his own family. He owes about $2.5 million. They are desperate. I asked the only question that mattered. "Is the drug in the whiskey?" "Yes," the voice said, and the line went quiet. There are moments when a person divides. One part wants to run. One part wants to fight. A smaller part wants to sit down on the back steps and weep. I am old enough to know which part to feed. Evidence matters. Robert's letter sat in my wallet like a lighthouse, telling every banker and notary to call me and my attorney before anything happened. But paper works best when the room will not lie to itself. I needed someone else to see what I had seen. I needed the scene to play long enough for the truth to arrive wearing a uniform. I went back in through the kitchen door. The smell of lemon cleaner and roasted carrots hit me like a memory of decent things. Rosa stood very still, a dish towel pinched in her hand. Our eyes met. She made the smallest gesture I have ever understood, a tilt of the chin toward the hall, a kind of prayer that meant caution. I nodded and walked the corridor as if I had gotten lost between 2 rooms full of furniture I could not afford. When I stepped into the dining room, Daniel smiled too quickly, the way a salesman smiles when the buyer returns from the parking lot. Claire's smile came late and bright, like a flash that leaves a shadow. "You all right, Dad?" Daniel asked. "Happens to me, too, after a big meal." I apologized for taking up my time, praised the roast again because politeness buys you minutes, and reached for my water. Daniel topped off my whiskey without asking. I lifted the crystal, let the amber roll against the cut glass, and set it down by the light, still untouched. The leather folder waited a hand span from my plate. I opened it with the same care I used to test a hot pan. Draft perched at the top of the first page like a feather meant to soothe. Advisory consent sat at the top of the next page like a smile that does not reach the eyes. Halfway down, a sentence slithered around the real point. Upon incapacity, temporary delegation of authority may be deemed permanent to ensure continuity. There was no definition of incapacity. There was no doctor requirement. There was only a blank space where a man's power used to be. Daniel began to talk about probate and tax exposure and ease. He had learned the vocabulary of helpfulness, the tone of benevolence. The word ease rang like a bell every time he said it. Claire played harmony on cue. "Your wife always wanted you to enjoy life, Edward. She told me that once." I felt my jaw set. Margaret never told anyone to turn me into a passenger. People borrow the names of the dead when their own names will not do the job. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. I needed the room to reveal itself. I raised my glass, made a gentle toast to decency and truth, let the whiskey touch my lip and no further, and set the glass down near the light. I told a short story about the first oven I bought for the diner, the way the pilot light kept dying until a repairman taught me how to use the shut-off valve. They nodded through the wrong parts, more interested in their own script. While I talked, I slid my phone out of my pocket under my napkin and sent a short line to the number that had warned me. "I'm at the table," I wrote. "I understand." Time does not pass the same way in a room where people are acting. It thickens. It thins. It turns into a wire you have to walk. Daniel pushed a single sheet toward me, a preliminary consent that would let his consultant start the process. A paragraph down, a clause granted the consultant limited agency to obtain signatures necessary to perfect the advisory engagement. It was the kind of clause a hungry man might not see until he was full. I slid the sheet back and said I would review it at home with Robert present. He said it was standard. I said so in caution. Rosa came in with coffee. She set cups with a steady hand. As she turned, her fingers brushed my sleeve. A small slip of paper clung to my cuff, then fell into my lap like a feather. 4 words in neat block letters. 10 minutes, stay calm. I did not look up. I did not look at her. I asked Daniel to walk me through the consultant's fees as if money were my only concern. He obliged, and while he talked, I lifted my water again and let the whistle of my breath find a slower tune. The doorbell rang the way doorbells ring in expensive houses, not a ding so much as a chime, not a knock so much as a tone. Claire half rose, smoothing the tablecloth. "That must be the binder from the consultant," she said, already rehearsing the reason he had not called first. Daniel stood, palms out, worried host. Footsteps crossed the foyer. A calm voice carried down the hall. "Montclair Police," it said. "We received a call for a welfare check." The room changed weather. Claire sat back down but kept her fingers on the folder as if it were a pet she meant to protect. 2 officers entered the dining room with the kind of quiet that fills a whole house. The senior officer asked for identification. He asked for my name. He asked if I was here by choice. I told him yes, and I told him I had concerns and had asked my attorney to be present for any discussion about ownership. I handed him Robert's letter. He read it, passed it to the junior officer, and looked at Daniel. "Are there documents on this table that would transfer ownership or authority?" Daniel laughed the kind of laugh that wants to be a door. "Just ideas," he said. "Just drafts." The junior officer opened the folder, laid the pages where the light could see them, and read aloud the agent clause in the preliminary consent. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Words like that do their own shouting. He turned another page and read the incapacity sentence. The officer looked at my glass and asked if he could examine it. I said yes. He tilted it under the chandelier. Sediment caught the light, not dust, not sugar, something that did not belong in whiskey. He set the glass on a small evidence square from his pocket as if he had always known he would need it. I told them about the warning on my phone, the whisper in the pantry about dosage, and my choice to return so other eyes could see. The senior officer called in a plainclothes detective with a small field kit. He dipped a strip, waited, dipped again, and nodded. "This indicates an agent that increases intoxication," he said, sealing the strip in a clear bag. He asked if I felt unwell. I told him I had tasted only enough to be polite. He lifted the glass and studied the swirl at the bottom. Daniel began to talk fast. He said he loved me. He said he would never hurt me. He said I was confused by legal language. He said a consultant had recommended preliminary flexibility. He said he was just trying to help with taxes. He said we were a family, and families keep decisions private. Claire's voice was sweeter but thinner. She said I looked tired, that Margaret would want me to rest, that everyone would feel better when the paperwork was finished. The detective did not argue. He simply asked who had prepared the documents and whether any other papers existed. Rosa stood at the threshold with a dish towel still in her hands. The officer asked if she wished to say anything. She looked at me, then at the floor. "I heard enough to worry," she said. "I called because I did not want to hurt Mr. Miller." The words were plain and heavy. The room seemed to understand them. The senior officer asked Daniel and Claire to stand with their hands where he could see them. He explained that, pending lab results and my statement, they were being detained for attempted financial exploitation and possible poisoning. He recited their rights in a level tone that left no edges to hold. Claire tried to explain the language as harmless, as routine. Daniel looked at me with that old hurt that always searched for someone else to carry it. He said this was family business, that the papers were only to help. The officer did not debate purpose, he examined behavior. The junior officer moved to place cuffs. The small click of metal sounded enormous in a dining room built for celebration. Daniel pulled back and blurted that he had debts for the business. The detective asked how much. $2.5 million, Daniel said, and the number was louder than the doorbell. "To whom?" the detective asked. Daniel swallowed a name and did not speak it. The officer did not need the syllables. The number told the story. He turned to me and said, "Dad, Mother would never forgive you for this." I kept my face still. "Your mother valued truth more than comfort. She would not bless what you asked me to do," I said. They walked Daniel toward the hall. Claire tried to reason with the detective, her words tumbling into the old well of apology and performance. She said they were only trying to help me prepare for the future. She said I am forgetful, that I need guidance. The detective, who has heard more kinds of trouble than I can count, kept his voice level. "Ma'am, consent obtained through chemical influence is not consent." She stopped after that. The senior officer handed me a card with a case number written in clean blue ink. He said the district attorney would contact me for a formal interview. He asked if I wished to collect any personal items from the home. I told him I had brought nothing I wanted to take. He gave me a look that held more than words and said they would escort me outside if I preferred. Rosa stepped slightly forward and asked if I needed a ride. I told her I was fine and thanked her with my whole voice. She nodded the smallest nod I have ever seen. On the front steps, the night felt colder, and the cold felt good. The lights of the patrol car painted the stone columns blue and red, like a slow pulse you could see. I stood there for a moment and tasted air that did not belong to anyone. The house behind me resumed its performance for whoever would next believe it. I walked down to the curb and called for a car, then put my phone away and let my hands be empty. The ride back to Brooklyn crossed the river of lights that makes me feel small and held at once. I thought about the first framed dollar. I thought about Margaret's handwriting on the meatloaf card. I thought about Daniel at 8, crying over a broken glass until I showed him the wet paper towel trick. Memory is not a courtroom. It is the town you live in after the trial. At home, I turned on the brass lamp and watched light settle over the oak table I made. I set the certified stock copies beside Robert's letter and smoothed the edges. Then I called Robert and gave him the facts. Police answered a welfare check. A field test showed an intoxicating agent in my glass. The drafts included authority I would never grant, and officers detained them. He did not gasp. He said, "Good, we will tighten what is already tight." We spoke about a protective order for the company, certified notices to vendors and landlords, and one message to every bank: no transfer without my written consent in the room with counsel present. He would contact the district attorney, forward tonight's documents and recordings, and stand beside me at every meeting until the case found daylight again. I poured water and let myself sit. The apartment made its old sounds: the radiator breathing, a bus sighing at the corner, the neighbor upstairs skating a chair across the floor. I stared at the empty chair where Margaret used to sit with the paper and circle coupons we never redeemed. We were close, I told her, closer than I like to think about, but I am not the man they counted on. I am not the signature they imagined. Saying it out loud made it truer. The room held me up like a pair of hands. My phone buzzed again. A text from a number I knew too well. "You did this," Daniel wrote. "We could have settled this without cops." I set the phone face down. We could not have settled anything that required me to be someone else. Another message arrived, a single sentence from an unknown number. "Good men deserve help." I typed "Thank you, Rosa," and did not hit send. Some debts are paid by living well. Sleep came late and clean. When morning brought coffee and the scrape of recycling bins along the curb, I dressed in quiet clothes, tucked Robert's letter back into my wallet, and checked the stock copies one more time like a man patting his pockets for keys. I stood by the window and watched steam rise from the building across the street. I felt something like fatigue step to one side and let purpose through. Before I left, I looked at the photograph on the mantel. Margaret smiled with that calm that turns a room into a place instead of an area. "They thought they had me," I said. "They thought age meant surrender. Now they can learn what consequences feel like." The sentence did not taste bitter. It tasted like water after a long walk. I locked the door and headed for the train. My hands were steady. My breath found a quiet rhythm. Somewhere behind me, a house was learning how loud silence can be when an audience leaves. Somewhere ahead, a clerk at the courthouse was warming up a stamp. In my pocket, a letter waited, and in my mind, the next steps clicked into place like the perfectly cut pieces of the oak table under my lamp. I did not know every turn the day would take, but I knew enough. Justice had stepped into the room, and for once it had not apologized for being right. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and paper, and the echoes of footsteps carried more weight than words. I sat in the front row, hands folded on my lap, listening to the judge read out the charges: conspiracy to commit financial exploitation, attempted poisoning, and elder abuse. The words sounded cold, technical, almost clinical, yet each one was a blade that carved away the lies Daniel and Claire had wrapped themselves in. My attorney, Robert, sat to my right, calm as ever, a stack of documents at his elbow. Across the aisle, my son and his wife sat pale and stiff, their lawyers whispering in their ears, but even from where I was, I could see the panic in their eyes. Panic has a way of breaking through even the most polished mask. When the evidence was presented, it felt less like drama and more like arithmetic. The police report was clear, the lab results undeniable. The whiskey glass tested positive for a chemical meant to sedate, a drug commonly abused in hospitals but never found in a family dining room. The folder of documents contained clauses no reasonable parent would sign without duress, clauses that gave away not just money, but dignity. Rosa, standing small in her work shoes, testified with a steady voice about what she had overheard, how she had made the call that likely saved my life. I felt a surge of gratitude so deep it surprised me. She didn't owe me anything, but she chose decency over silence. Her courage stood taller than the chandeliers of that mansion ever could. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. The verdict was as firm as a gavel strike. Daniel was sentenced to 15 years in state prison. Claire to 10. Their lawyers tried to soften it, tried to argue about intent, about confusion, about misinterpretation. But intent cannot erase evidence, and confusion does not lace a father's whiskey with poison. As the judge pronounced the sentences, Daniel shouted that I had ruined him, that Margaret would never forgive me. Claire wept, not with sorrow but with rage, insisting it had all been for my own good. I stayed seated, my breath calm, my voice silent. There was nothing left to say. Their downfall was not my victory speech. It was the sound of justice landing exactly where it belonged. Afterward, the press asked questions outside. Cameras flashed, microphones pushed forward. I said only what mattered. No parent should ever have to defend themselves from their own child. But when betrayal comes, you must choose truth over silence. Then I walked away. That was enough. Words are powerful, but peace is louder. I had reclaimed everything. My company, with its 7 diners worth more than $2.5 million, my Brooklyn home valued at $700,000, the accounts totaling near $3 million in combined assets. All of it intact, all of it now guarded by structures Robert and I had built tighter than any lock. But possession wasn't what I craved. I wanted freedom. So I made a choice that surprised even me. I established a foundation in Margaret's name, funding it with $500,000 drawn from the company profits. The foundation's purpose was clear and simple: scholarships for children in Brooklyn who had lost parents, because no child should grow up without a chance to build a life. I imagined Margaret smiling at that, imagined her voice saying, "That's the way to make loss mean something." I moved out of the big house with its polished floors and heavy curtains. I sold it for $650,000, less than I might have gotten if I waited, but more than enough to secure what I wanted. I bought a modest apartment worth $200,000, a second-floor walk-up that looked out over Prospect Park. The kitchen was small but bright, the living room cozy with sunlight spilling across the floor in the mornings. My neighbors were teachers, nurses, and retirees. No marble foyers, no sweeping staircases, just real people living real lives. For the first time in years, I could walk out my door, cross the street and sit on a bench with coffee, watching children play, dogs chase sticks, and old friends argue over chessboards. That was wealth, not numbers on paper, but minutes well spent. Peace doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in fragments. The first morning in that apartment, I woke to the sound of sparrows outside my window instead of traffic muffled by expensive walls. I brewed my own coffee, sat at a wooden table that I had refinished myself, and felt something I hadn't in years: contentment. I wasn't Rick H. Edward, the restaurant owner. I wasn't a widower with a mansion. I was just a man with a cup of coffee, free to decide what the day would mean. And that was enough. Daniel's fate unfolded quickly. Prison strips away the pretense faster than time ever could. 15 years is a long sentence, long enough to miss graduations, long enough to see hair gray behind bars, long enough to learn what it means when family visits stop. Claire's 10-year term placed her in another facility, apart from him. Letters began to trickle, attempts at apology, explanations, pleas for forgiveness. One came through Robert's office, written in Daniel's handwriting, pages long, smudged in places. He wrote about debts, about fear, about pressure. He wrote about wanting to prove himself, about hating how small he felt in my shadow. He begged me to write back. I folded the letter once, twice, and slid it into a drawer. Then I said aloud into the empty room, "I don't need your apology. I need my life." That was the last time I spoke of it. Claire's letter came shorter, colder. She wrote that she had been foolish to trust Daniel, that she had only gone along because she thought survival meant clinging to the one man she believed in. But survival built on poison is not survival at all. I placed her letter in the same drawer and closed it. Those words were not keys. They were stones, and I would not carry them. Their friends scattered, their social circle dissolved. People who once gathered in their Montclair home for dinners and fundraisers quietly moved on. No one wants to be reminded that betrayal lives inside expensive walls as easily as cheap ones. The mansion was sold to cover debts, debts larger than even I had imagined. By the time the state was finished seizing assets, Daniel and Claire had nothing. They were left with each other's blame and silence, a harsher prison than concrete. Meanwhile, my world grew lighter. I walked each morning through Prospect Park, nodding at joggers, greeting the man who sells hot coffee from a cart, waving to Rosa when I stopped by her corner bodega to buy bread. She had left service in Montclair after the trial, choosing honest work over silence. I sometimes told her she saved me twice, once with her warning and once with her testimony. She always shrugged, saying, "I just did what was right." But what is right often takes more courage than what is easy. I began volunteering at a community center on 9th Street. Children spilled into the gym after school, their laughter filling the high ceilings with something like redemption. I taught them how to flip pancakes on the stove, how to chop onions without crying, and how to measure ingredients with their hands when they didn't have cups or spoons. Cooking is more than food, it is math and memory and patience. Watching their faces light up reminded me why I had built restaurants in the first place. Not for money, but for connection, for people. At night, I wrote in a leather-bound journal Margaret had once given me. I wrote about betrayal, about love, about money, about how easy it is to confuse the value of a man with the value of his estate. I wrote lines like, "Trust without boundaries is not love, it is surrender." And greed is a storm that does not stop until it has torn down every roof in sight. Writing these words steadied me. It gave shape to the lessons I had paid so dearly to learn. One evening, sitting at my desk with a lamp glowing, I caught myself whispering to Margaret's picture. "I did it, love. They didn't win. They thought age meant weakness, but it only meant I knew how to endure. I'm free now, truly free." The words filled the room with warmth, as if she were sitting across from me, nodding, her eyes soft with pride. The lesson is not just mine. Parents need to remember, sacrifice is not a contract that binds a child to loyalty. It is a gift, given freely, but it must not blind us. Boundaries are as much an act of love as generosity. To the children who might be listening, money will never replace love. Betrayal of the hands that raised you is not victory. It is self-destruction. And about people in this modern world, greed is not new, but it wears sharper clothes now. Still, character remains the only wealth that survives the storms. Weeks later, another letter came from Daniel's prison. I recognized his hand before I opened it. This time, I didn't even read it. I slid it back into the envelope and placed it unopened in the drawer with the others. There is no healing in rehashing wounds. I don't need their words, I told myself quietly. I have my life. That is enough. And it was true. Each day I walked home past the playground near the park, watching children run in shoes too big, laughing at jokes too small, and I felt the world had balanced itself. My son had chosen greed and paid dearly. I had chosen truth and paid dearly too, but my payment bought peace. He bought nothing but walls. The apartment became a sanctuary. The oak table I had salvaged gleamed under the lamp. The shelves held books Margaret once loved. The window framed a stretch of park where leaves changed color with the seasons. I cooked simple meals, I listened to the radio, and I met with friends at the diner. Sometimes at night I sat in silence and let the stillness speak. It always said the same thing. You survived, and you are free. Freedom, I've learned, isn't about money. It isn't about control. It is about living without someone else's hand on your shoulder, forcing you toward choices you never wanted. Freedom is waking up in the morning and knowing the day is yours. Freedom is not needing forgiveness to move forward. Freedom is not answering letters that should never have been written. When I looked at the path ahead, I saw new roads. I had joined a charity group that served meals to the homeless on weekends. I had signed up to mentor young people interested in restaurant work. The foundation in Margaret's name was already funding its first 2 scholarships. Life did not feel like an ending. It felt like a second beginning, one I had earned through fire. Tomorrow is a new start, I wrote in my journal one night, and I believed it. The betrayal nearly broke me, but it did not. Instead, it carved me into someone sharper, clearer, calmer. I am not just the man who lost trust in his son. I am the man who rebuilt trust in himself. That is the real victory. That is the peace I carry now, and it is enough to last however many years I have left. The mornings in my new apartment have a rhythm I had almost forgotten. The place is small, simple, worth about $200,000, but when I sit at the little kitchen table with my coffee, looking out at the park across the street, I feel as though I live in a palace. The sun comes through the window, spilling gold across the floorboards I polished myself. Children's voices drift in from the playground, and sometimes an old man feeds the pigeons near the bench I now call mine. Peace has a sound. It is not silence, but the gentle hum of life happening around you without demand, without betrayal. I joined a small group at the community center not far from here, a program for older adults teaching each other how to protect against financial scams and abuse. Every Tuesday, we gather in a bright room with folding chairs and chipped coffee mugs, and I tell my story. Not all of it. Some wounds do not need to be reopened, but enough so they understand the danger of blind trust. I show them the kind of clause Daniel tried to slip into those papers. I explain how easy it is to believe that blood means safety. Faces nod, some with tears in their eyes, because too many of us have walked too close to the same fire. It feels good to know my scars can keep others from burning. I often think about the lessons I carried out of this storm. The first is for parents. Love your children. Yes, give what you can. Yes, but never confuse sacrifice with surrender. A parent's duty is to guide, not to hand over everything, and hope gratitude will be enough. Boundaries are not a lack of love. They are the proof of it. The second is for children. No matter how much money glitters in front of you, it cannot buy back trust once you lose it. A betrayal of your parents is a betrayal of yourself, because you cut the very root that gave you life. And the last lesson is for all of us living in this quick, hungry modern world. Greed wears many masks now, from contracts to investment schemes, but its hunger is the same. The only true wealth that survives every season is character. Daniel still writes to me from prison. The letters arrive once a month, sometimes long, sometimes short. They always carry the same rhythm: apologies, explanations, promises of change. I keep them unopened in a drawer, the envelopes stacked neatly like a deck of cards I never play. One day, perhaps I will burn them. For now, they sit as a reminder that forgiveness is not the same as contact. I tell myself quietly whenever a new envelope arrives, I do not need their words. I have my life, and I mean it. The rift is final, the boundary firm, and it brings me strength rather than sorrow. A small letter came one afternoon, but not from him. It was from Rosa. She thanked me for helping her get a new start after leaving that house in Montclair. She had found steady work at her cousin's grocery, and she wrote that she was proud she had chosen truth when it mattered. Good men deserve help, she wrote, echoing the words she once sent the night she saved me. I sat at my table with the letter in my hand, smiling at the truth in her words. Blood did not save me. Courage did. And sometimes courage comes from those who share no relation but share a stronger bond: decency. I walk in the park most evenings now. The trees sway like old friends, and I take my time along the paths, stopping at the bench Margaret loved when she was alive. I talk to her there in a whisper. You can rest easy, love. I kept what we built safe, and I learned that self-respect is the richest legacy we could ever leave. The breeze moves through the branches as though she nods, as though the world itself agrees. I no longer feel the sting of loss the way I once did. I feel her presence in the life I chose to live with dignity. For those listening to this story, I offer my last thoughts. To the parents, love your children, but place boundaries as firmly as you place your love. Do not give away everything you have without protecting yourself. To the children, never forget that love and gratitude outlast every dollar you could chase. To all people, young or old, in this noisy modern world, greed may rise like a wave, but character is the only anchor that will hold. Money can be taken, homes can be sold, but the measure of who you are cannot be stolen unless you hand it over. As I lock the door to my apartment each night, I feel a peace so steady it almost surprises me. Each day proves I made the right choice, not just in saving my estate, but in saving myself. I am not defined by betrayal anymore. I am defined by the boundary I drew, the dignity I kept, and the new life I live. And that is enough. My story is not just about loss or pain, but about choosing self-respect in a world that too often asks us to surrender it. Every morning I wake up, pour my coffee, and look out at the park, and I say to myself, I finally found where I belong. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.